The Cosmere, a huge series written by one of the most well-known authors of our time. Spanning multiple planets and solar systems, the Cosmere is the perfect playground for a good author to show off his skill when it comes to character depth, setting creativity, and an overall logic not just to the rules of the universe, but its themes. Many of his flagship series do just that. The Mistborn saga is one of hard magic and an inverse of typical storytelling direction. The Stormlight Archives is a great tapestry of diverse creatures, people, and culture mixed into a story that never stops grabbing your attention. Many of his other standalone novels also bring the best of modern fantasy and never fail to help the reader escape into a beautiful, unknown world. But there is one story in the Cosmere that I feel is left out of many people's minds as something to be forgotten or dismissed. This is Elantris, a story about an abandoned city that used to hold a race of people capable of doing things that even our modern day technology lacks. A time where kingdoms are being born out of past wars and more war seems to be on the horizon. We meet a prince struck by a terrible disease, a princess who dedicates her life to improve the lives of citizens stuck in a corrupt system, and a priest sent to convert an entire kingdom before it's too late. Much can be said about Elantris, but one thing is obvious, that it was born out of love from a person who deeply cares about their craft. Elantris is the first published work of Sanderson, but the sixth novel he wrote. I can only imagine the thoughts going through one's brain as they sit down to write another book that will most likely not be read by anyone but yourself. What do you write about? Do you try to stick to other popular trends or things that other authors are doing? Maybe just get one book out and you'll have a little respect in the industry. Or does one go big and try to create a story that might not be familiar or relatable to everyone, but actually have something to say about the world and ourselves? I clearly do not know what Sanderson was thinking when he was writing Elantris, but I will say that it has a unique style when it comes to how it reveals the world and the characters in it. Sitting at 200,000 words, it puts those words to work at revealing the culture, religion, and politics of a place we will most likely never see again. It has this throw everything at the wall and see what sticks to its pacing. Not in a bad way that shocks and confuses the reader with random new elements, but in a way that is purposely different from what you would expect from a typical fantasy novel. Sanderson's laws of magic are at play here, and his signature Sanderlanche, it's even harder than usual, but I'm mainly talking about the premise, the characters, and the themes. At the beginning of the story, we meet Raoden, the prince that we spoke of earlier, and how he was struck by an incurable disease. With dark splotches covering his entire body and his hair falling out, Raoden is sent to the city of Elantris, where all victims of the Shaod go. Raoden slowly realizes that the Shaod is not your typical disease. The victims of this said disease cannot die like regular men. In fact, the Shaod is preserving their bodies in their dead, pale forms, with one big problem. From the smallest bruise to breaking a leg is felt constantly and forever, leaving them incapable of dying but feeling intense pain, causing many Elantrians to go insane and become immobile husks of their former selves. And if that wasn't bad enough, they still feel a need to eat. But since they're in a city with no crops and no way to import food, this becomes just another pain, one that drives many to violence or despair. This is a great premise. Not only does it immediately get the reader thinking about what they would do in that situation, but how they would feel. We instantly become connected to our characters or anyone stuck in such horrible circumstances. It shines light on the fact that our lives may have pains and struggles, but there is hope that at least one day it will end, in this life or the next. Sanderson has always had a good sense of how to handle terrifying moments or situations that in other books would be horror stories. Here he takes a character that by all logic and reason should give up on his life and seek the path of least resistance to minimize his pain, but not all hope is lost. Raoden refuses to give in to the nihilism around him and quickly starts forming plans to not just improve his life, but the lives of everyone in the city. He recruits others to rebuild the city and to recreate that feeling of life they had outside the Shaod. Raoden is an optimist to a fault, and this story would not work if he was anything different. Paired with the pessimistic Galladon, who Raoden says would doubt the sun's rising if he wasn't proven wrong every morning, shows us what it means to be alive. Often in the modern world, we only think about happiness as a feeling we get from pleasure. Good food, fun experiences, and getting what we want. But what are we left with if those things are taken away? Is there nothing more to life than temporary distractions from our suffering? Raoden says no, seeing that the people are so focused on selfish goals that they will never be able to reach, like steady food or relief from their pain. Raoden sets his fellow Elantrians to work on things that will benefit others, like making shoes and cleaning the streets. And at first glance, this might seem like another momentary distraction. The people of Elantris do not feel the cold, they do not get any more sick, and they don't even need to eat. So they derive their sense of meaning and purpose on the betterment of their lives and of the community. Adopting the name Lord Spirit, Raoden convinces the already existing gangs to stop fighting and to coexist by revealing their humanity and showing them a higher calling. Through art, beauty, and honor, the Elantrians start forming an almost paradise, a near reversal of the state of the city was before Raoden came. Raoden is able to save the people of Elantris not by freeing them from their ills, but by giving them a responsibility to bear together. And in working on something bigger than any one individual, they find a way to overcome their miserable existence, restating that famous quote from Nietzsche, "He who has any why can bear almost any how." In many ways, Raoden is a prelude to Galladon from the Stormlight archives, someone who dedicates his life to saving others. But unlike Galladon, who struggles to let anyone die and has his own struggles when it comes to his depression, Raoden is more of an ideal that most of us will never reach. While Raoden is not as relatable as Galladon, his relentless will and optimism is something that's very refreshing to read. Having someone believe in the good of humanity, even in a fake story, can be very inspiring to people in the real world to do the same. And while real life is oftentimes more complex than the concept of the Shaod, we can all look at Raoden and strive to see the good in humanity with the people that are right around us. Hrathen is a dedicated priest, a Gjörn of the shuravf religion, a very military-focused faith. Hrathen is sent to Arelon to convert the masses to shuravf. Nothing special there until you realize that Hrathen, unlike your typical evangelist, has a deadline. If he does not find a way to convert the people of Arelon, then the leaders of his religion will come and take the country by force. Hrathen is a surprising character for me. At first, I was really shocked to see Sanderson experimenting with a villain as a point of view character, which is something he usually limits to only a few chapters in each book. But then I slowly realized that Hrathen was not going to stay a bad guy, and that he was slowly going to be turned into a good guy. And I was a little bit disappointed because I thought the only way that was possible was to take Hrathen's faith away from him, to make him doubt his religion. But Hrathen's journey is very different from your typical religious character. I can't remember the last time I read a book, watched a film, or heard anyone tell a story about a religious character that doesn't end up doubting their own religion. They either question whether their God is real or whether any of their actual faith, any points of their faith, are true at all. Sazed is one of those characters from the Mistborn series, which was handled perfectly, and by the end of that trilogy, he was one of my favorite characters. But I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear another story about another religious person going through a journey of doubt. That can't be further from the truth. He's not just another faith character that questions everything he believes, but mainly a character that questions how he believes. Now, this distinction might not be a huge deal for some, but for someone who is religious, it is very relieving to be able to read a book about a character that doesn't just doubt everything. His struggle with how he feels about his faith and how it has changed over time is very relatable and very common amongst people in different faiths. Hrathen, being someone who uses logic and reasoning to believe, looks back at how different his faith was at the beginning of his conversion, how he had so much more passion and emotion back in the day, which is triggered by seeing Dilaf and his unfiltered and unashamed faith. All his years of study and devotion have only gotten him more lost, and his initial spark of faith now seems alien to him. The fire that started it all is now unfamiliar. He's a smart man that calculates, thinks things through, and can execute his plans without emotional motivation. Quote, "He was not a zealot. He would never be a man of extreme passion. In the end, he followed Shuravf because it made sense. That would have to be enough." End quote. Hrathen was my favorite character in the book. His mixture of determination, wit, and strength will have you hoping that his plans come true until you go back to one of the other point of view characters. And remember that his plans will most likely destroy their lives. And this premise of an anti-villain turned hero from a religious perspective is great, and not something you see very often. You can feel Sanderson's religious background pouring through Hrathen's chapters. He's also a great fold for Raoden, even though they have minimal contact throughout the story. Raoden, as a prince, is expected to be arrogant, corrupt, and willing to do things for the greater good of either his family or his kingdom, but instead he is good to a fault and puts himself last in every situation. Hrathen is the opposite. As a high-ranking priest, you would expect him to act holy and morally correct all the time, but instead he makes deals behind closed doors, uses illusions to fake miracles, and breaks rules within his own religion to further the growth of that said religion. He's still viewed as sympathetic to the audience because we get first-hand accounts of his true devotion to his faith and how he justifies certain actions with one of his best attributes, his intelligence. Dilaf also helps in this regard because of him being a more straightforward villain who in the end becomes a literal monster. Hrathen, having a little bit of that same conditioning that Dilaf has from that monastery they both went to, but not letting it define him in the end, is a great visual metaphor for both of these characters' internal struggles, or lack thereof. And then Hrathen killing Dilaf with that same conditioning adds to the poetic justice. Hrathen shows the reader that strong faith and devotion to one's belief is crucial when one wants to change the world for the better in whatever way you think is best. But that blind passion can lead one down paths that would break the logic of that initial belief in the first place. Dilaf sacrifices others' lives as if they were pieces on a chessboard, and while he claims to care about others' salvation, his priority is one of punishment to those he has already judged as unworthy. Hrathen, on the other side, even in his darker moments with his backdoor dealings, still cares for the souls of others, which is why when he preaches, he calls upon their intellect and their higher reasoning instead of trying to tap into baser emotions. When Hrathen comes to Arelon, he declares that one day these people will call him their hero, their savior, and in the end it becomes true, but not in the way that Hrathen thought. Oftentimes, our journeys of faith, whether they are religious or not, can lead us into places and ideas that we thought we would never venture into. But honesty with ourselves first is what keeps us from becoming the very monsters that we seek to destroy. Hrathen is a perfect example of how humans can hold multiple contradicting ideas at the same time, yet we strive for that true truth that we hold so dear. Sarene was supposed to marry Raoden at the beginning of the story, but as she arrives in Arelon, she finds out that he is dead. Now, in most situations, a dead partner would end the marriage, but in her contract it says she is married to Raoden whether he is alive or not. Sarene is now stuck in Kai without a husband or a clear purpose of where to go and what to do. And most people would probably just lay back and relax with the much wealth that she has just garnered from her new father-in-law, but that's not Sarene. She immediately starts poking around, sticking her head into things, and turning over rocks that are best left untouched. Sarene is a natural at how politics work and how to manipulate people to do what she wants, which would typically make her a bad person, but her strong will when it comes to leadership is coupled by the fact that she wants to improve the lives of everyone, regardless of their class, gender, or religion. Her home country of Shaod is much more caring when it comes to how it treats its citizens, and her father is a good king that not only loves his people, but also Sarene. The reason I spoke about Sarene last out of the main characters is because I feel like her character journey is a lot more well-rounded, but it also lacks any punch. Sarene doesn't just go through one major character arc, nor does she stand for one major idea. She's a combination of smaller ideas and smaller arcs, which would do better in a series rather than a standalone novel. So many of the changes that she goes through need to be simplified or lack a strong payoff. Sarene is her own worst enemy. She doubts her own leadership, even though many strong characters follow her. and at the same time, she feels a need to be sarcastic and patronizing to those who doubt her abilities. She loves the spotlight and is proud of being different, but also struggles with the feeling of being alone with her talents or being treated as an outsider. Her many marriage proposals that all fail give her the impression that she'll never find love because she's too bold and masculine in her personality, and categorizes herself as not pretty just because of her height. So much of her journey is basically learning to balance her unique talents while also accepting her uniqueness, not as a barrier to other things she wants, but just as stepping stones to a better her. Quote, "You're an excellent judge of character, Sarene. Accept your own. Often our own opinions of ourselves are the most unrealistic." End quote. Sanderson has yet to write a female character that I don't like, mainly due to the fact that Sanderson doesn't seem to feel the need to over-glorify his female characters. And Sarene is a perfect example of this. Even though she has many strengths that are usually associated with male characters, she is still flawed, and yet these flaws do not take away from her strength, but simply make her human and relatable. But like I said, the major reason Sarene lacks weight for me is because of the length of the book and how much she is forced to go through. Much of what she learns is very similar to Vin from the Mistborn series, but unlike Sarene, Vin has 3 whole books to come to terms with her conflicting characteristics. Marcy is also a great character that goes through multiple arcs, but since Wax and Wayne are the main spotlight for most of the books, we get the perfect amount of page time with Marcy to see how and why she chose certain values over others. Sarene deserved more time in the book, but she did a really good job at balancing out the other 2 main characters, challenging both at what they thought were their greatest strengths. I will say many of the problems I have with Sarene go away once she meets up with Raoden, just because of how well they fit together narratively. Overall, I will say that Elantris is about hope. The world, its characters, and even the magic system is seeking a way out of this prison that many remember didn't exist just a few years back. Our characters find that way out not by going back in time, but by forging a new future. I will admit, not everything is perfect in the story. One major thing I didn't like is that Hrathen fell in love with Sarene, which felt very out of place with his character. Also, the way that Galladon was ultimately defeated was very much out of nowhere and was too convenient for our protagonist. Lastly, when it comes to problems, is there are a lot of random magical elements thrown in the last act, and this is something Sanderson usually spends proper time fleshing out. But even with those problems, I love this book. If Sanderson does write a more direct sequel to this book, I hope he does the world and the people in it justice. And he usually does. Thank you for watching, and Godspeed.